Emily from New England, you're live on Truth Wanted now. I'm kind of reading the description here, and I kind of want you to explain to me what you're trying to say. So, Emily, you're live on Truth Wanted. What's up?
So are you guys familiar with the Dyatlov Pass Incident?
The Outlaws Pass Incident? I don't know that I am.
Okay, so the Dyatlov Pass Incident was, it happened in the Soviet Union, and about 9 hikers were doing this winter ski hike thing in the Ural Mountains, and
Yes.
they all died.
Yes. Okay. I just Googled this while you're talking. I am familiar with this. Okay. So I think I can fill in the gaps, Emily. So you tell me if I'm getting it wrong. But the idea was basically these hikers were found right with their clothes off, and they like had sunburns kind of all over their body, and they were just like kind of out in the middle of the camp, right? That's what happened to them.
Yeah, so there's a lot of conspiracy theories about Dyatlov Pass, and for a while the most reasonable explanation was an avalanche, but there was a lot of problems with the idea of it being an avalanche, which is why most people didn't believe it.
Mm-hmm.
And very recently, I think in 2021, thanks to Frozen, actually, the Let It Go people, they were able to do some more research, and Avalanche still doesn't explain everything, but it makes more sense now.
Wait. I heard about this. So I just want to give more context to what you're saying, just so everybody understands. So what happened was, if I recall correctly, so when they developed the movie Frozen, the Disney movie, they did a lot of, there's a lot of physics that goes into building some of the engines that they do for animating that movie. And they actually used the physics engine that they made for using Frozen and simulated snow to see if it could match up with the original site. That's right, Emily, right? That's what happened?
Yeah, that's what happened.
Mhm.
They were trying to see if it could trigger a small avalanche, because there's all these problems with it. I don't want to go into too much details unless you have specific questions, because I'll just take up the whole thing. But I guess there's another explanation that answers a lot of questions that the avalanche theory doesn't answer, namely the injuries, which is parachute mines. And it's a little bit more of a conspiracy theory, even though we know that the Soviet Union was testing parachute mines, and we know that they were testing it in that area. We don't have evidence that they were testing it that night. There's nothing that we can, test the way we can test an avalanche. So it answers more questions, but there's less evidence for it, if that makes sense. Whereas the avalanche, we can test more, and so it has more concrete evidence of it being possible, but it leaves a lot more questions. And what I'm finding is that even though my rational brain wants me to say probably an avalanche, and that there's just a mystery with the injuries, because their injuries have a lot of deep internal damage, very little soft tissue damage. So it's like having multiple broken bones and internal organ damage, but no bruising, like that kind of a thing.
Yes.
And usually you don't see that in cases like this, but you would see it with parachute mines. But anyway, my brain kind of wants to go for the more conspiratorial, and of the parachute mines versus the more likely. Avalanche is more likely than, the military is testing secret weapons or something. You know what I mean?
Yes.
But I don't know why my brain is doing that, or how to stop it from doing it in other circumstances.
Well, I think it's a pretty natural thing, right? I think everybody kinds of has wonders about kind of world events and what happens and stuff, right? Like I mean, talk about JFK, for example, right? There's people that were there and saw kind of what happened and are just kind of confused and still come up with stuff. Same thing with like 9/11, right? There are people that were at ground zero who saw planes crash into the building and stuff and still have questions about how everything was orchestrated. I mean, like, I think it's just a natural human tendency to just assume something greater is happening than what is actually happening, right? I mean, you see that across a lot of different kinds of stories. When I first heard about this, I understood now, and now I'm kind of, I looked at the Wikipedia here, I'm kind of refreshed on the details. Some of them died of hypothermia. So it made sense that, when you get into a hypothermic state, right, you actually have that sort of kind of a paradoxical undressing, I think is what it's called. And so you actually end up taking off some of your clothes instead of, wanting to keep stuff on. So there's a reason why, some of them were like naked while they were out there. And also they were really tan because they were out in the sun, even in the snow, you can still definitely get a tan. The stuff that's kind of weird to me about this, Emily, is the injuries, because according to this, 3 of them were fatally injured, but 6 of them died of hypothermia, which is kind of interesting. It almost seems like there was a great injury that occurred and maybe some people tried to stay and try to help, or try to, do what they could when something happened. But I don't know, it might be one of those things where we never really truly know, right? But it's kind of just fun to fill in the gaps. Jim, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's kind of fun to play what if games. You're talking about a parachute mine. Why aren't you seeing shrapnel damage? I would expect to see more bruising and broken bones from an avalanche than I would from a mine explosion. If they're the kind of mines I'm thinking of. But
do that though. I think you're thinking of something else. Parachute mines blow up in the air. They don't blow up near the people. And then,
right, but there's still shrapnel, right?
Yeah, but it doesn't. It blows up at a different height and far enough away from people that it wouldn't. Yeah.
Well, what's the purpose of them? Because the ones I was looking at are naval mines dropped from the air. So if the purpose is not to kill people on the ground, then what's the purpose of a parachute mine?
They kill people on the ground, but they don't. It doesn't kill via shrapnel. It kills via like air pressure. Like it sends like a yeah. It's not like shooting a bomb at somebody. It's a little bit. It kills in a different way.
It kills by concussion. That seems a little odd.
Yeah.
And a little. I mean, a waste of explosives, honestly.
Yeah, there is something to say there about, like, I wonder why they would just kill random people out in the middle of the mountains, right? Unless they were all in on something really big. But yeah, I've never heard of the individual actors being a part of something grander. Maybe you have, though, Emily. You've obviously been reading more about this.
I think it just happened to be an accident. The Ural Mountains are very. The idea behind the parachute mountains is that that's just where the Soviets did a lot of weapons testing because it's
okay. That makes sense.
People don't live there, and except for I think there's like a native tribe that lives there, but like they don't really, and also like it's the Soviet Union. One of their main tourist attractions is around a lake that's also like one of the most polluted lakes in the world. Like they test things all the time in pretty populated areas, but this particular one is just where they test a lot of weapons, and the hikers went hiking there.
Yeah, I'm seeing one of the speculations talking about the parachute mines. I'm also seeing on here, I remember like seeing a History Channel, like documentary about this, about how supposedly like a Yeti could have come in and done something, right? I mean, there's so many different stories and ideas about what happened. I'm also seeing here that according to the Russian government, they are either saying it was the result of an avalanche, a slab avalanche, which I guess is a kind of ice avalanche, and a hurricane. And they don't say that it was murder or anything else involved like that. So they're kind of going a completely natural weather phenomenon. They opened it up, they declared this again in, it says 2019. And in 2020, that's so weird because this happened in like the 50s, right? 50s or 60s. very weird that they would open that up again. I guess it's like the Jack the Ripper stuff. You know, people just want to know, right? They want to get some closure on some of these crazy events. So very interesting. That's a trip down memory lane for me, Emily.
That's what I'm struggling with the most, though, is that like my rational brain is like, it's probably an avalanche. It's probably an avalanche. But I guess I'm wondering like when it becomes conspiracy thinking and when it becomes just like I'm asking questions. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, I think I do.
When do you become?
Okay, here's what I would say to this. First of all, conspiracies do happen, right? Anybody that says otherwise has not studied enough history. It definitely happens. Levels of conspiracy, though, I mean, that's going to be a bit different, right? Usually the scale is quite different from what a lot of people think. But like government conspiracies do occur, right? We did a whole segment on this show talking about MK Ultra, right, and the effects of that, which was definitely a real thing where the government of the U.S. government was drugging random American citizens and also some Canadian citizens. But the reason why we know about that is because there were leaks about not leaks about it. There was an inquiry about it, and then it went to a whole Senate testimony and stuff. And then so more reporters got in on it, and then more information was released to the public, right? So we know about stuff like that because we have a lot of evidence. We have a lot of records for it. The problem with something like this is that unless we have better evidence to show things, like Jim brought up a good point. I imagine a bomb is probably going to have some residue somewhere, right? That's something that's going to tie to it. Unless we can really say one way or the other, I'm not sure if it's warranted to be able to say, oh, this is the site of a military test. I mean, and it very well could be true, but we still have to work on something that could be warranted, right? Something that could at least guide us to that conclusion rather than just pure speculation, because otherwise anybody can just speculate on stuff, right? I don't know. I think that's kind of a good baseline, though. Jim, what would you say?
Yeah, I was trying to read a little bit while you were talking, because I was curious about this mine thing. And the only thing I see is it's a shrapnel mine, but they think the pressure wave from it collapsed some of the tents. I'm not seeing where they think it damaged any humans, because I'm kind of thinking that's not overpressure can happen and can do damage, but I don't know of an overpressure in open air like that, how that would happen. That just doesn't make any sense to me. So if it was a mine, I still see that. There's a really good book called Deep Survival that talks about what happens to people in their heads when they get into survival situations and what helps them to survive. And people do stupid stuff. They'll drop their survival gear thinking that they'll get to wherever they're going faster because they're not lugging it around. But they're completely lost. So they still need their survival gear. They just don't have it anymore and die of exposure. People can panic. So it's hard to say. You're under a lot of stress. So a fight could easily break out.
Jim, what do you think of Emily's?
Hit their heads.
What do you think of Emily's question, though? Because Emily's wondering, where's the line? Where do you get to say, okay, now we can start considering conspiracies versus other kinds of explanations, right? How do we get to that point?
When you have sufficient evidence.
Yeah.
Right. So one of the things with conspiracy theories is who benefits. So could it be that the Soviet military was testing something? Sure. Is the Soviet Union known for covering things up? Yeah. But what are they covering up here? I mean, it was done in the 1950s, right? This event was 1950s. So what's the benefit to them now? Other than saving themselves embarrassment, but
yeah, I think that would be it, right? I think the motivation would be, look, they're doing these testing of these weapons and they accidentally killed civilians. So rather than admit that the Russian government killed civilians, they would say that it's the result of a natural event or something, right?
Right. But here they did another investigation in 2019. Not sure why they would want to do that, but yeah, it's still possible But do we have sufficient evidence other than it's in line with what the Russian government's been known to do? You know, I think you need something more. And also you have to be willing to go, we don't know.
Emily, go ahead.
To actually testing parachute mines in that area. They just claimed that they weren't doing it that night. So the Soviet military, we know that they were doing it in the Ural Mountains. They just said they weren't doing it when that incident happened. But Avalanche is probably most likely right. I just don't know why my brain is having such a hard time letting go of the other answer.
Yeah. You just keep going over it until you convince yourself one way or the other, or just settle on, we'll never know.
Yeah, I'll
that's
say
the other option, right?
I'll say this. When it comes to things like when we talk about MK Ultra, right? Again, like there were eyewitness testimonies and stuff, but like when people really were getting serious was when that paperwork comes out, right? Even with military operations and stuff like this, even if it's just training, there's going to be some paperwork involved. There's going to be some stuff that can come out to demonstrate that. I think if we had some of that, then it might make that conclusion more reasonable. But I think also there's just a human need to just like want to fill the gaps and want to fill the holes, even when we don't know stuff, which is why a lot of people believe in God, you know. But besides that, I mean, when it comes to stuff like this, sometimes people just want to believe more. And maybe that's where you're at, Emily. Maybe it's like, oh, I just think that there's something more to this, because I agree. There's a lot of like weird details about this stuff, right? That's why so many people are fascinated. I mean, geez, the Wikipedia article alone is gigantic. And obviously people have been talking about it for years. There's a reason why they opened it back up, right? But I think, I don't know, at this point, unless there's an even bigger cover up happening, which it could be, I wouldn't say that it's not impossible. It's just that it's not the most reasonable thing to believe. And that's just, I don't know, it's one of those kind of facts of life. It's just one of those things to meditate on, I guess, you know, and try to, you know, hope that we don't let our emotions get to us. Hope we don't let our wants and desires, you know, overtake what we want to be real. So yeah, Emily, I wish I could help you more. It's just kind of, it's hard to do, right? It's like, man, I want this to be true, but you know, all things point to maybe it not being true.
Yeah, it feels like I just need to deconstruct it like I did with religion, because it feels like I just like when I was hanging on to religious things, I don't know, it feels kind of similar to want to hang on to knowing, even if the knowing doesn't have the evidence.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, that's definitely a great insight. I think a lot of people who come from backgrounds where they get really into conspiracy often do a similar kind of thinking that religious communities sometimes do, where the thinking is kind of backwards, right? Like I didn't like rationalize myself into Christianity. I was baked into the culture, right? Like that was fed to me before I could even fully think about it. And with a lot of conspiracy theories, right? People are getting those ideas through like Facebook memes and Telegram chats and stuff before they can really digest what it would mean, because maybe they already have biases and motivations, right? Like we already have biases towards the Russian government, for example. I'm sure you and I can both point to examples where they've definitely done shady stuff. I mean, most world powers have, right? So, you know, there might be something that points us to wanting to think that that could be a possibility. And again, it's always okay to be open about it. But at the end of the day, if you're going to, I don't know, if you're going to really testify to what could be the most likely explanation, I think that's where you have to hang your hat and say, like, look, it's probably more natural causes than it is something else, right? Because we just don't have anything else to support it other than, you know, a plausible idea, right? So I don't know. I hope I'm helping you here, Emily.
I guess. I think I just need to do more thinking. But thank you for talking it out with me. I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's what we're here to do, is talking through some of this stuff. And you know what? You caught me off guard with this, because this is not one I've thought about for a really long time. Maybe if I was more prepared, we can go over some of the deeper parts of it. But it is definitely an interesting mystery. Emily, we'll go ahead and let you go, but thanks for calling the show, and hope to hear from you again. Jim, what'd you think of that call?
That was a good call.
I thought so too.
I'm just not up on it. The mine idea seems really weird. A mine that kills by overpressure in open air, that doesn't make any sense. I mean, a mine going off and causing tents to blow over and things like that, that makes more sense. And just because the Russians weren't dropping parachute mines that night, you know, you don't go walking through any place where aircraft is dropping ordnance just because they've stopped. It's still dangerous because there's unexploded ordnance there. So it could still be a mine, or a mine that went off for whatever reason. But mine's destroyed by shrapnel. So I don't know, none of the bodies seem to have shrapnel wounds. So it's, you know, hard to say.
Yeah, there's a lot of different explanations for this one, you know, or speculations, I should say. So it really does get your mind going about what could have possibly happened here. And I don't know, the best thing I could say is you just got to take everything in one at a time and just really think about what's going to be most likely. Of course, extraordinary things do happen sometimes, but
Yeah.
you know, we can't just say, oh, I thought it was aliens. I think aliens came down and just zapped them, right? Like, okay, maybe that could have been the case, but why would you believe that over like an avalanche or something, right? It's just like
Right.
we gotta go with more naturalistic explanations or things that we know have occurred in the past first before we can jump to stuff that hasn't, right? At least in my opinion. But what do I know?